Welcome back, everyone. Today we're making a 5-panel hat, and this is a very easy hat to make. I'm also going to be throwing in the option of a pencil holder and walking you through the project step by step, showing how you can make your own hat at home and also upgrade your production to start manufacturing hats. With all that being said, don't forget to grab the PDF pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you'll need a 1/4 yard for your main fabric, and I recommend using a canvas, denim, or twill. These fabrics are very durable and they're great for hat making. I'm going to be using a mid-weight corduroy. If you do use a corduroy, I recommend sticking around that mid-weight area. If you go too thick, it can really change the overall feel of the hat and it might not fit right. And that goes for all the other fabrics. But like always, get creative with it, test different fabrics out, and see what works best for you. You'll need 4 eyelets, and these are going to be used for the vents on the side of the hat. You can stitch these on, or you can use eyelets. You'll need a 1/4 yard of cord, and this is optional. We're going to be using it up front on the brim. It's just a small little detail. If you don't like the look, you don't need to add it. And for the rest of the supplies, you can buy these all on capsupplyco.com in a kit or separately. They have a wide variety of options of leather closures, plastic closures, nylon closures, all in different colors, so you should be able to find something that works with your fabric. And I recommend grabbing a brim. You can get these in different shapes and sizes. You can use cardboard, but I highly recommend using plastic. It lasts longer and it's actually very easy to sew through. You'll need 1 sweatband. You can make these, but it's best to buy them because it's going to make your end product a lot more wearable and feel nice. You'll need 1 side strip. This is going to go on the inside under the sweatband. It brings the crown into shape at the end and gives you a little bit of stability when you're putting on the sweatband. And you'll need a back closure. You can get these in leather with buckle, poly snap, or nylon clips. Like I said, there's tons of options at capsupplyco.com. I recommend checking it out for your next hat project. Lastly, you'll need your pattern. This pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is download it, print it out, and you're ready to go. Real quick, before you cut the pattern out, just double check the size scale at the top of the page to see if it was printed at the correct scale. Once you have all your supplies gathered and your pattern printed out, it's time to move into cutting. And after printing out your pattern, double check to make sure it's to the correct size, and then we're going to cut on the outside of the black line. Once you cut out all of the panels, you're going to end up with 2 pencil holder panels cut out of your main fabric. This panel is optional. If you don't plan on adding the pencil holder, you don't need to cut out this panel. 2 side panels cut out of your main fabric. 2 top panels cut out of your main fabric. 2 front panels, 1 cut out of your main fabric and 1 cut out of interfacing. And the interfacing is optional. If you want to add structure to that front panel, you can add it or you can skip this supply. If you do choose to add it, just remember we're not cutting it to the exact shape as the panel. We're going to cut it bigger and then trim it later. And lastly, 3 brim panels, 2 cut out of your main fabric and 1 cut out of your plastic or cardboard. If you are cutting the plastic, remember to use the outside edge of the pattern. When it comes to the fabric panels, we're actually going to be cutting these bigger just like we did the interfacing because we're going to place the brim on top of the fabric and then trace around the outside edge of the brim. You want to give yourself enough room because you want to include the seam allowance and then also room on the back edge to stitch it to the crown in later steps. Moving on to assembly, the first thing we're going to do is create the pencil holder. If you don't want to make this feature, you can skip this step. So what you want to do is separate the panels, place the right side together, and stitch the side edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing up the stitch, pull the right sides out, and we're going to pop those side edges out as best as possible. And from here, we're going to add a top stitch to both sides, and then zigzag stitch or serge the top and bottom edges. And the reason we're adding the serge is to clean up that raw edge, just to prevent fraying in the future. After finishing up the top stitching and adding your zigzag stitch or serge, the pencil holder panel is complete. Keep in mind, you can adjust this to any size based on what you're going to be using this feature for. If you're using it for pencils, markers, or pens, this size works great. If you're using it for anything bigger, you might want to extend the size. But other than that, the pencil holder is complete, so we can place this assembly off to the side and grab all of your brim panels. I'm going to be using a pre-cut brim, but if you plan on cutting your own brim, you're going to use the outside edge of the brim panel. The best method for cutting these is using a clicker press with a die. This will give it perfect round edges and a professional look once you put it inside the sleeve. But whether you're cutting yours or using your own shaped brim, the next step we're going to grab the 2 pieces of fabric, place the right sides together, trace the outside edge of the brim, and I like to extend it past about 1 inch, round out the corners, and then also add a center marking. Once the brim is fully marked, we can place it off to the side. Using the pattern, locate the fabric sew path, and this is where we're going to be placing our stitch. It's just under a 1/4 inch on the inside of the curve, and then we're going to stitch all the way around the outside edge. It's very important to do the stitch all in one go because if you start and stop, it's going to create little edges, and once you flip the right sides out, you're going to see ripples and it's not going to sit well with the brim. It does take some getting used to, so I recommend practicing on scrap fabric. From here, we're going to trim the outside edge a 1/4 inch away from the stitch. You want to give yourself enough allowance so that way when you put the brim inside, you can fold that seam allowance under the brim. Flip the right sides out, push the curve out as much as possible, and press it down. We're trying to make that inside seam allowance as flat as possible. You may see a few ripples, but once you grab the brim and place it inside the sleeve, you're going to stretch it as far as you can towards that outside curve, and that should take care of any of the small wrinkles. This is why the stitch path is smaller than the actual size of the brim, so that way that sleeve can stretch around the brim and take care of any of the blemishes. Pull both sides of the fabric as tight as you can towards the bottom, place a pin, and then we're going to stitch the inside curved edge as close as we can to the brim. This is going to help set the fabric and keep it tight around the brim for when we add our top stitches. The top stitching is optional. If you don't want to add it, you can skip this step and keep the brim as is. But we're going to be adding them, and feel free to add as many as you want. When I was filming this specific brim, the camera went blurry on the first stitch, but luckily I had a backup fabric and it's the same exact process. I'm using an adjustable edge guide and I'm going to keep pushing it in and adding a new stitch. And you could use any type of edge guide. It doesn't have to be an adjustable one. As long as you have the brim up against an edge, you're good to go. I was also using an industrial sewing machine. This is not necessary. I just had it set up already, so I decided to use it, but you can still do this on a domestic sewing machine. The last thing we need to do is cut off the excess fabric in the back, and I'm leaving about 1 inch of fabric because you want to give yourself enough room so you can attach it to the crown at the end of the project. You can cut it shorter or closer to that inside curve. I just found about 1 inch works perfectly. Real quick before we move on, if you're using a different shape brim, the steps are still the exact same. I went ahead and made another one with the short brim from capsupplyco.com. I'm going to be adding this to a separate hat at the end. And this is something that's fun to play around with in the design side of it, changing out the brim, different shapes, and it gives you a whole different look. But other than that, the brim assembly is complete, so we can place these off to the side and grab the front panel. You should have one panel cut to the size of the pattern out of your main fabric, and for the interfacing, it's optional. If you don't want to add the interfacing to create structure in that front panel, you can skip that supply. If you do choose to add it, I recommend using a heavyweight interfacing. This is going to help make the hat durable and long lasting. We're also going to be cutting it larger than the actual panel because we're going to be adhering the panel to this interfacing and trimming the outside edges. And we want to get the entire panel, so that's why we cut it larger. For the at-home application, you can use a press on high heat, or if you're trying to scale up your production, it's best to use a large heat press. This is going to have a higher heat temperature so you can do it quicker, and then you can also add a lot more on the entire surface area, so you're not just doing one panel at a time. It's just a nice tool to have if you plan on making a lot of hats. And depending on your interfacing, you may need to adjust your temperature to find something that works best with your specific interfacing. But anyways, moving on, once the interfacing is applied, we're going to trim around the outside edge right up against the side of the panel. And if you're really trying to speed up production, you interface an entire sheet of fabric, and then you use a clicker press with the die to stamp out both of the layers. Before we move on, I want to quickly show that at this stage, it's best to embroider if you're going to be adding an embroidery logo on the front panel. It's way easier to embroider on the flat panel as opposed to a finished hat that's curved. You're going to get a lot better stitch in the end. And as you can see, my interfacing is bigger. This is because I didn't have a loop small enough for that front panel, so keep in mind if you do plan on adding it, you may want to keep your interfacing intact. And again, this step is optional for the embroidery. If you're actually sewing on a logo, it's still best to do it at this stage while the fabric is sitting flat. But like always, do what works best for you. And for the moment, this panel is complete, so we can place it off to the side and grab the two top panels cut out of the main fabric. Separate both of the panels with the right sides facing up, locate the top edge, and this is where we're going to be adding our stitch. So place the right sides together, lining up both the back and front edge, and stitch that top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And it's very important to get a perfect 1/4 inch stitch or else the hat might not fit correctly. For the next step, we're going to be cleaning up that top edge and adding a top stitch, and I'm going to be using a double fold bias tape binder for a double needle sewing machine. But don't worry, you can also use this on a regular domestic machine. And that's what I'll show you right now. Start by replacing your needle with the twin needle. I'll have this needle linked in the description, and this needle works on all domestic machines. Switch your machine to zigzag stitch, your choice of length, and a 0 width.
Thread your machine the same way, but add 2 spools of thread. Be sure to thread through both of the needles and add your binder. It's best to have the bias tape already in so you can line it up with the needles. And I found the easiest way to do this is just tape it down. And once you have it installed, give it a quick run to make sure all the stitches are looking good. Grab your front panels and place that seam directly in the center of the binder and stitch all the way through. And just like that, it's going to add a double top stitch on the front and cover the back seam. If you want to speed up the process, I recommend looking into a dedicated double needle sewing machine. It will save time and allow you to keep sewing multiple panels in a row. When it comes to the choice of bias tape, I do recommend using a lighter weight fabric, something that's going to blend with your main fabric so you don't see these once you put the hat on. This step is fairly important to get a nice professional finish, and from here we can slide this assembly to the side and grab the front panel. Using the pattern, locate the top edge, and this is where we're going to be attaching it to our top panel assembly. So place the right sides together, lining up that front edge, and it should be the exact same width, and from here we're going to keep it along that edge and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Since you are sewing on a curve, you kind of have to move that top panel as you stitch. Since we have a stitch going through the bias tape, we can trim the end flush with the seam allowance. Just like in the previous step, we're going to open up that panel and add a top stitch on the outside and bias tape on the inside. And this is why I like a dedicated machine, because you're going back and forth and it's hard to keep switching out the components. And I always like to double check on the inside to make sure the seam got fully covered and that bias tape is perfectly stitched. If everything is looking good, this top full assembly is complete, so we can place it off to the side and grab both of your side panels cut out of the main fabric. Before we sew these to the top assembly, we want to first add the vents on the side. So using the pattern, locate the eyelet placement guide and place the pattern over top, lining up the front and back edges, and mark out your eyelet placement guides on both panels. And for the actual vents, I'm going to be using eyelets. You can use eyelets or you can stitch these on. I just like the look of an eyelet because it gives it more of a dynamic feel. If you are using eyelets, the first thing you want to do is punch the holes, place the eyelet from the right side of the fabric, and then add the backing on the back. I'm using a standard hammer die that comes with the kit, so you're going to place the base on the right side and then use the die portion and hammer it down from the back side. If you're looking to speed it up, you can get a machine that you can punch the hole and add the eyelet all with one button. And then go ahead and add the rest of your eyelets. The side panels are ready, so grab the top assembly. Using the pattern, locate the front and back edge. And you'll want to line the front edge up with the front panel and the back edge up with the back of the top panel. It's very important these are lined up correctly or it's not going to sit right once you put the hat on. This is a very major curve, so what you're going to do is line one of the edges up and then move it as you sew it. I found that this is the quickest and easiest way. Also keep in mind you're sewing on a bias, so that fabric is going to want to stretch as you sew it. If it stretches too much, it's not going to be lined up with the curve of the side panel. So just take your time and we're going to sew both panels on at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing up, double check both sides, make sure you have a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance. If it's off just a little bit, the hat might turn out too big or too small. Before we add the bias tape, you're going to want to trim the previous bias tape flush with the seam allowance. Quickly flip the right sides out and double check those curves from the outside perspective. If everything is looking good, we're going to go ahead and add the bias tape and top stitch to both of those curved edges. This is the trickiest one with that curve, so take your time and try to make it as neat as possible and centered in that stitch. Once again, after stitching, double check the inside and outside, make sure both sides are looking good. If everything checks out, place it down with the opening facing upright and grab a size strip. This is optional, but it really does help when adding the sweatband and it seals off that bottom edge. What you want to do is line it up directly with the bottom edge and have enough sticking past the back opening on both sides. And then we're going to stitch it down directly in the center of the size strip. If done correctly, the bottom edge of the size strip should line up perfectly with the bottom edge. Keep in mind the side panel fabric may want to stretch as you're sewing, so you're going to want to prevent this so it doesn't make the hat too big. And at this point, we can trim the remaining bias tape flush with the bottom edge, and then same goes for the back opening, trim the size strip and the bias tape flush with the back opening edge. That will bring us to our next step, and that's going to be sealing off this back edge. And there's a few different ways you can do this. I'm going to be using a double fold bias tape binder. If you choose to go this route, you can use an attachment like the one I'm using, or you can use pre-made or make your own bias tape. The second option is folding that edge inward and treating it like a hem, so you're going to roll the edge over twice and stitch it down. Both techniques work great. It really comes down to preference and how you want your hat to look. Now that the crown is fully ready, we can slide it to the side and grab our brim. It's best to start with marking the center on the brim and also marking the center on the bottom edge of the front panel. Then we're going to place the right sides together, lining up the size strip on the inside of the curved edge. I like to start at the center and then move towards the outside edge and make that mark. From that mark is our start point, and we're going to start stitching and then sew all the way through the inside curved edge to the other side. This will ensure the center point lines up, and at the end, the brim sets perfectly in the center and it's not offset. It is fairly tricky, so if it does turn out offset, you can easily de-thread it and re-stitch it. You really want this to be 100% accurate because once you put it on and it's offset, it's going to sit very weird. You also want to stitch as close as you can to that brim so that way the fabric is butted up right against the edge of that inside brim. It does take a little bit of practice, but you will get it over time. The next step, we're going to grab our cord. I'm using a standard paracord. Feel free to switch it up. This is going to sit on the top side of the brim, so you want the piece to be long enough to go past the edges on the inside of the hat. Don't worry if it's a little bit long, we're going to snip these down in later steps. I found the best way to do this is to stitch one side and then you're going to pull it tight and stitch the opposite side. Because if it turns out too loose, the cord is going to be flapping around. Also, this is optional. If you don't like this look, you don't need to add the cord. I just find it's a fun little detail to add and it could really change up the look of the hat. Like I said before, wait to trim the ends of the cord because we still need them to be long. The next step is also optional. We're going to be adding the pencil holder on the side of the hat. The first thing you want to do is figure out what side you want to place the pencil holder on, whether you're right or left-handed. Then we're going to line the serge or zigzag edge up with the bottom edge and roll the top edge over once so the raw edge is hidden. And I'm placing this directly in the center of the side panel. It may look tall, but that bottom edge will roll in and make it smaller. From here, we're going to stitch the top edge and the bottom edge. For the bottom edge, try to stitch directly on top of the size strip. As you can see, when you put a pencil in it and roll that bottom edge inward, it's going to fit perfectly so it's not flopping around on the inside of the holder. And you can also fit markers, pens, or anything that's around that same diameter. Like I said when we were making the pencil holder, you can change up the size, you can make it taller, longer, and make it work for what you're trying to add. So have some fun with it and customize it to your use. Moving on to adding the sweatband. This sweatband is bought at capsupplyco.com. It's a millinery grade sweatband. You can make these, but these are designed to put on the inside of a baseball cap and it's going to curve and fit nicely. The goal is to sew it along the bottom edge, and that can be pretty tricky, so what you want to do is use a device. Luckily, you can make this out of cardstock paper. All you have to do is make a little sleeve that your sweatband slides into and it fits perfect to the same size as the sweatband. You don't want any wiggle room on the side edges. And you want this to be at least 5 to 7 inches long. Feed the sweatband through your new attachment and have about 2 inches hanging out. With that step complete, we can take it to the sewing machine, line it up directly under the needle, with the inside of the sweatband pointing up and the right side of the sweatband lined up with the needle, and then tape the attachment down. And that's really all it takes. You're ready to start sewing. That sweatband's going to start moving as you sew. But before you start sewing, you're going to want to roll that edge over once, the exact same size as the size strip. Place the outside end over the needle and then just start sewing from there. And you're going to work all the way around over the brim and to the other side. It's very surprising how well this technique works because you get right up next to the brim and then you also get a top stitch on the outside, so you're essentially doing 2 steps in one. And that is the most complex part of making this style of hat. It's very easy to do and you can do it at home. But like always, if you do want to ramp up your production, you'll want to look into a post-bed sewing machine with a sweatband feeder. And that's what this is right here. It feeds the sweatband through the feeder, lines it up perfectly with the edge, and then you just follow it along the edge and stitch it down. With this step, you're not going to get the top stitch on the outside, so the sweatband will look like it's popping out just a little bit, but that will be fixed in later steps when we steam the hat because that will push that sweatband flat perfectly on the inside of the hat. But if you do want to add a top stitch, that's what you're going to do next. You're going to add a top stitch all the way around that bottom edge. For this specific hat, I'm not going to add it. And that brings us back to the inside. Locate those cords and trim them flush with the size strip. With the cord ends out of the way, we're going to move to the back opening and install the back closure. For all of the styles of closures, you're going to roll that sweatband inward and then upward so it's lined up with the back opening. Do this to both sides and it'll give you a perfectly sealed off finished edge. Before you stitch it down, you want to first figure out what type of closure you want to slide in between the sweatband and the bias tape. You can go with leather, poly snap, nylon clips. So find something that works best with your design. I'm going with the leather and buckle, so I'm going to slide the leather strip in between the sweatband and the bias tape, lining it up with the bottom edge, stitch it down, and then I'm just going to stitch the opposite side down with nothing in between the layers. It can get pretty bulky, so use a heavier weight needle and go slow. After you have both sides sealed off, it's time to install the buckle, and we want to line this buckle up with the leather strip. So pull the leather strip to the opposite side, see where it lines up, because if it's a little bit too high, it might make that bottom edge offset and both sides will not line up. Make the mark on the outside of the bias tape. I always like to double check it, pull the leather back over one more time with the buckle, make sure those bottom edges line up. If everything is looking good, we're going to open the buckle and punch a hole through the opening on the bottom side of the buckle. Keep in mind we're going through the main fabric in both layers of sweatband. The buckle takes a lot of use, so you want as many layers there as possible for structure. These buckles are secured down with eyelets, so place the eyelet through the opening from the inside of the hat, so the right side of the eyelet is on the sweatband. There is no back side of the eyelet, so we're going to place the buckle on top inside the opening. Swivel the buckle so it lines up with the leather strap, and I'm going to be using a die press to install it. You can either use a die press or a hammer press. Just like that, your buckle is installed, so feed the leather through the buckle, try it on, see how it fits. This specific buckle set does come with an oval eyelet that you can install, so the leather strip goes into the eyelet. It's done the exact same way. You punch your hole, you feed the eyelet through the opening, and then that one does have a backing. You feed the backing on the back, and then you press the side edges down. If you are adding the eyelet, you're only going through the main fabric layer. For the final steps, add the rest of your branding. I added one on the side, and I added the one in earlier steps on the front. And then we're going to steam the hat. I'll be using a hat block. This is a more at-home technique. You can find these on eBay. You want it to be big enough so the hat fits around and stretches as you're putting it over the hat block. This is very important because once you apply the steam to the outside edges and all of those bias tape strips, it's going to flatten everything out on the inside and give it a professional finish. I'm using a stand steamer. I found this was a great way to go. If you don't have this type of steamer, you can still just use a press steamer. After steaming, let it sit on the hat block to dry, and once it's dry, you can take it off the hat block, and as you can see, the sweatband is perfectly flat on the inside edge, along with the bias tape strips and the seams on the outside. If you plan on making these hats to sell, this step is mandatory because it gives it that professional finish, and it's going to make it a cleaner look when your customer buys the hat. I also made one with the smaller brim just so you can kind of get an idea of what the small brim looks like. I think it makes for a cool and unique look. Both of these sizes are available at capsupplyco.com, so go check those out and grab which one works best for you.
And there you have it, your 5-panel hat is complete. Hopefully you had some fun with it and yours turned out great. And this is a fun pattern to kind of build off of, change up the brim shape, change up the closure, add a pencil holder, or even make your own features. And like always, I want to see what you come up with, so tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing. And until then, I'm going to keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.